Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, it is 2022, the 17th of January, which is MLK Day. And it's interesting. I have some thoughts, as I do on pretty much everything, but one of the things that always kind of gets to me about, well, today or Pride, um, yeah, well, with the pandemic, things have changed a little bit, but pre-pandemic, I'd go and do the march. And I went actually on the last Phoenix Pride. It was kind of a off-cycle, abridged version, but they still had, Pride a few months ago. And I did the walk. Accidentally, like the people I was trying to meet up with, I couldn't find them. Not sure where they were. And accidentally kind of lumped in with Greg Stanton's group, which not my favorite guy. He's okay, he's fine, but not great. And also, some radio DJ was watching the thing and kind of called out, "Hey, it's Greg Stanton's people," and then, "Oh, where's Greg?" It's like, yeah, he wasn't there. Not that it matters that much. I mean, this is the thing that I'm thinking about the marches. If you think about like the historical marches that these are modeled after, when you're actually like trying to cross a bridge and you've got cops like beating the fuck out of you, that's a slightly different thing than going to Pilgrim's Rest Church downtown and then just kind of hanging out a little bit early and then taking a little walk down to, I don't even know what that area is called, but down sort of downtown and around. It's a very different thing. Now, it is symbolic, and you are kind of showing support, so I like it, but to me, I mean, like, I like a walk anyway, and, I don't mind being there, but I feel, to some extent, like, it's a little bit of show, you know? Like, it seems to me that you should probably be doing more of, and these aren't exclusive, to be fair, but probably better to do some kind of service. And better still would be, it's like, don't just donate to the food bank on Thanksgiving, kind of like people are hungry all the time. Um, Racism is a thing all the time, so maybe try to do something about it to some extent, whatever little extent you can, all the time. Or at least more regularly. You don't want to just take this day and do something about it. Homophobia is a problem all the time, and transphobia, very fucking ubiquitous. And also, even it's kind of interesting because there's a whole section of and they call themselves LGB, conspicuously minus the T community, who are pretty much transphobic, and they just kind of like exclude trans people, and you're like, this is fucking to me it's the same kind of thing, where if you think about Israelis, more than most people on the planet, should know how horrible it is to have ghettos and apartheid and all of these kinds of things, because World War II, now granted, it's getting further back in the rearview mirror, but it's not that far back. Like, people my age definitely have seen survivors speak, and even if once they're all gone, there are still video recordings and many opportunities to see that stuff. It's not something you should forget about. And so like you would think that if you were oppressed, especially actually given that Pride came, like it was started literally by trans women, you'd think that maybe the trans community would be supported, generally speaking, but no, it's kind of, you always, it's just interesting to me. There's always some prejudice that you can have. There's some group that can be the out group for whatever group you're in, and indefensible, I think, but it's there. And it's also disappointing because it's like, I mean, speaking of disappointing, I mean, this is just a more general thing. Always going back to Twitter, as I do. Maybe one day it'll be interesting. There was a day before I was on Twitter, and there was even a long period after I signed up for Twitter where I just didn't feel it. For years I had my account, barely tweeted at all, and I don't even know what changed exactly. Certainly, like 2016, 2015, kind of probably spurned me on a little bit, but whatever it was, became much more active, and now I'm very active on Twitter. Presumably, all things have sort of a due course. All things have a little bit of a lifespan, and there's probably going to be a day when I'm not on Twitter so much. But for this moment in my life, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I see, this is not even prejudice, although I do definitely see plenty of that. But I have a lot of people who I follow who are kind of leftists, and they're for Medicare for all, and you would think would be good on a lot of stuff. And then you see, oh, they're anti-vaxxers. They annoyingly won't even cop to being anti-vaxxers. They like to call themselves, oh, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm even vaccinated. I'm just, I'm just asking questions is a big thing. Just understanding that, I'm pro-vax but anti-mandate or some bullshit like this. And you fucking look at this shit and you're like, I don't know. I'm so tired. My biggest criticism for people and their handling of this pandemic is there are so many people who are like me actually, they're tired of it. But then rather than being like me and saying, I'm tired and I just want the fucking government to do the basic, simple, obvious fucking things that anyone could have suggested, it's not like we just realized these things yesterday. Anyone who ever took a fucking epidemiology course over the last several decades at least would have known, okay, it's an airborne virus and it has this kind of an R0. So even without a vaccine, having a pause, a paid pause, where people are just basically, staying at home for the most part for about 6 weeks, that will give any of the current infections time to run their course. You have to hope. Now, it's an interesting thing because when I suggest stuff like this and then people come in like, oh, you're sitting there saying that ACAB, which is absolutely true, and you want a lockdown, but a lockdown, who's going to enforce the lockdown? The thing about that is you don't really need like the cops are going to come and beat you up if you're outside lockdown. What you really need is to be paid to, put all the fucking mortgages and loans on pause, put rent on pause, put all of this kind of stuff, all the bills, put that shit on pause, have the government pay for whatever, little inconvenience comes there. Although most of those pauses, literally you just tweak some numbers in a computer. I mean, all of this stuff, you can really tell how fake it is because student loan payments have been off for 2 years. And this is 1.8, almost going on 1.9 pretty soon, trillion dollars worth of debt. And it has made zero impact to shut that shit off. None. No measurable impact. Now, maybe if you want to get super, pedantic and kind of really dig into it, you could say, well, and especially if you're trying to say negative impact, really hard. Positive impact, well, a lot of people who formerly were stuck paying their loans have suddenly had that income that they could do something else with. So massive positive impact. But you would think if this debt was real, almost $2 trillion of debt, if that was real and, stopping payments on it mattered, then there would be some kind of things would start falling apart. And instead, nothing. In fact, I suspect one of the big reasons why there's not blanket student loan forgiveness is that once it becomes clear that you can forgive $2 trillion worth of debt and have no adverse reactions, what else can you do? It starts bringing into question a lot of stuff. And you start thinking, well, I mean, what about other debt? What about consumer debt? What about mortgages? What about whatever? And you start extrapolating out and you're like, I don't know. I mean, to some extent, I will say this. I don't think, I don't want to, obviously, I'm not qualified to talk about MMT, modern monetary theory. But what I can say about it, the whole idea of it is basically almost like a creation annihilation operator view of government spending, which is instead of taxes coming in and going into an account and then outflows coming from there, they're basically saying, well, taxes basically destroy money. You know, it's kind of a weird accounting. I mean, it's kind of arbitrary if it's destroyed or if it's just being accounted for. Are you creating real negative value with issuing debt, or are you just popping money into existence? It's almost just a philosophical question, I think. But anyway, their view is taxes come in, you're destroying that money. And they would say that it's important to do that because you don't want too much accumulation of wealth. And then they also say, well, government spending, you're just creating the money. It's not any kind of a balance book. It's not like home economics. And this is true to some extent. I mean, you could certainly, their argument is if you create a lot of money, you're not going to create inflation. Well, I mean, obviously, if you start creating like 100 times the total global economy worth of money, things start falling apart, right? It does break down at some point. You can't just give everybody $1 trillion worth of cash and have no, consequences of that. Although it'd be an interesting exercise to give everybody so much money that the wealth disparities essentially get washed out. I mean, if you imagine the richest person on the planet now has, and I'm not suggesting we do this, but a couple $100 billion. Well, if you gave everybody $1 trillion, then suddenly you go from those people having so much more than everybody else that it's almost inconceivably concentrated to now everybody's got $1 trillion. Yeah, you do get massive inflation to correct for that, but you've also essentially canceled out most of the variations between most of the inequities. Now, of course, inequities will come from that. The whole economy is basically structured to take small fluctuations in wealth and then amplify them. If you have more than somebody else, and somebody else wants something, well, then you can give them a loan, and that loan can be interest bearing. You can have fees. You can do all this kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden the inequity starts tipping a little bit more. If you are somebody who has, you have a massive source of income, not just property necessarily, but just say you have, property is a convenient one because you can take rent on it. Once you have rent, you have an inflow of capital, and other people are getting that sort of swooped out. And then that starts increasing the concentration. The big thing, I think, really is when there are periods of economic hardship, you end up having things where people the people who have more resources can easily weather the storms, and the people who have less resources get fucked over more. So, they borrow more, they do other things that end up putting them at a great disadvantage, while the people with more resources get even more. And then it kind of, so even if you did the thing like a great correction, where you just issued so much capital that you basically eliminated all, $1 trillion, you have people with 1 trillion, and then you have people with like 1.2 trillion. There's some inequity there. 10 trillion, at some point you do that, and the differences wash out. There's some number that you could do. And then you probably, if you're going to do that, you probably renormalize currency, because you start passing around like $1 billion bills. It's a little awkward. This is $100 million in this, how much is a coffee? You start figuring out what that would be. Yeah. But, normalize it. And then you could pretty much get some kind of more equitable system. You could also try capturing money. Becomes more difficult, especially, I mean, I don't know. It's when you think about how government works, and especially partly the same thing, like people with power have the resources. If you have power and money, you have the resources and the time and connections, whatever, to gain more of those by influencing elected officials, which means, again, you get this agglomeration kind of effect. Whereas people who have very little power, or especially people who, if you're working 3 jobs just to scrape by and you have no leisure time at all, you probably can't really pay that much attention to elections. You certainly can't spend a lot of time lobbying people. You're essentially taken out of contention in terms of having any kind of influence over our government. And I mean, it's a pretty fucked up situation, actually. And I think it is one reason why it's just dumb and horrible to structure a society where anyone needs to work. I was going to say 40 hours, but I don't even think, if you have to put a number there, 30 maybe. Personally, given my druthers, I think everyone would be able to have, and I'm not saying like you're living in luxury. I've talked about this before, but you shouldn't necessarily live in like massive mansion kind of thing and everybody has a private jet, but everybody should be able to have, and when I say a subsistence living, I mean really a nice, comfortable living. Like you have at least an apartment, and that apartment has a decent kitchen. It's not necessarily 200 square meters, but it's not like the little 9 square meter alcove that they have in places like Paris, where you're just like a bed and then a bathroom, which is basically a toilet slash shower condensed into one little thing, and then maybe a table, and that's basically, you're not doing anything in there. You should be able to have a comfortable space. We have plenty of space for that. We have plenty of money. We have plenty of resources. You should have plenty of food. You should, now again, maybe you're not having like the gold-plated lobster, right? As silly as that is to do, but you could have decent food, and not just like, oh, you get McDonald's every meal. You're getting vegetables and things that are, I mean, there's a whole other topic, just what we're subsidizing there, but never mind that now. You're getting healthy food that's more than adequate for what you need on demand. I mean, if you don't want it, you don't need it, but if you want it, it's there. And basic resources as well. Internet access. Not necessarily like, you're not getting the latest MacBook Pro maybe, but everybody should have access to a computer. Everybody should have an internet connection today. And basic entertainment as well. And again, I'm not saying like you can watch the 100-foot projection display things in your own private cinema necessarily. Although if you have the resources and a society that's truly, post-scarcity, maybe why not? But you should be able to have a comfortable life without working at all. Working, I think, should be an option. Now, it's an interesting thing because people would say, well, if working is an option, won't society just fall apart? Well, no, because, I mean, even for the jobs that are kind of shitty, that people might not necessarily want to do, if you're paying people enough to do them, then now it's like, okay, well, yeah, education is free, basic housing is free, but you might want a nicer house. You might want a nicer car. You might want to be able to go on a better vacation. You might want things still, and you pay people enough to work in a sewer or collect garbage, and they'll do it. And of course, also, like, these are jobs that probably at some point could be automated away. And the nice thing is, if you have this kind of setup, you automate them away and it doesn't matter. It's like, and the better thing still is someone, if you want to paint, you just want to be a painter, you can do that. If you want to write, you're going to write a novel, you're going to be a researcher, you're going to work on, robotics, or you're going to work on fucking anything, you know. You have the time and resources to do that. And certainly also, you know, I would imagine you probably develop, if you have this kind of setup, almost an artisanal society where you have a bunch of people, even in a place where you have automation that can build pretty much anything you want, you'll still probably have demand for hand manufactured goods and, you know, services that are rendered by people. And yeah, if you, I mean, you could imagine people having like a poet walking around with them, and that, you know, if somebody wants to do that and you want to pay somebody to write poetry or to recite it, you could do that. And if somebody wants to do that as a job, and if they don't want to, they're not in a position where they basically have a gun to their head that says, you know, like, well, you can quit, but if you quit, you're going to lose your health care. You're going to be on the street. You're going to not have any, you know, I mean, imagine how much better the world would be, could be, if we eliminated just that basic, you know, you basically just softening the bottom. Also, you know, I drive around town a lot, especially on the weekends. I go downtown and come back, and I pass homeless people, and at least probably homeless people. You can't even tell, of course, but people who are begging on the at the intersections by on and off ramps for freeways. And I would personally, I mean, just out of sheer self-interest, I would want to know that they're okay. And, you know, like, if nobody is giving them money, nobody's giving them resources, they actually have a place to go, they have all the stuff they need, they're okay. It would be like a voluntary choice if you wanted to do it, and probably very few people would want to do that. And also probably in that situation, you imagine like, okay, now people don't have to worry about it, so there's a little less pressure to for the people who care about other people to give them money because they're okay. I mean, the fact that we have, I can't remember the number exactly. I think it's order of 600,000 unhoused people in the U.S. I could be off by a few percent, but I think it's about that. The last I checked, it's you know, it's not like a massive town, but it's a decent sized town worth of people who have no place to live. And this is in the wealthiest country in history. You know, and I know people who don't like saying that because it's like, well, there are so many people who are actually poor or impoverished here. We're not the, but I mean, yeah, that's true. But in terms of like per capita wealth or income or any reasonable metric, we're fucking wealthy. You know, we're now the when you start looking at the median kind of stuff instead of mean, things look a little bit different. We're, you know, we're very wealthy. We're just not distributing it evenly, and we have some people. It's one of these things that, like, the inequity is almost difficult to fathom. It's really, even on a logarithmic scale, it's so concentrated among some people. Like, you know, I say $200 billion. Somebody has $200 billion. Like, what does that even mean? Well, if you plot $200 billion, well, okay, 200, so 1/200th of that is $1 billion. Now, $1 billion is an extraordinary amount of money. Like, most people in their lifetimes, if you have a nice job, you're probably going to make millions of dollars. Maybe if you have a really nice job, like approaching $10 million is a thing that you might plausibly do. And there are people that will make more, of course. But, you know, in that, so that's $1 billion, $1,000 million in that little thing. So this is 200 billion. That's 1 billion. 1/200th of that. And then in there, slice that up by 1,000 times. And, you know, well, let's just say 100 times. So we'll be really generous. Say somebody's getting $10 million over the course of their life. 100th of that is what somebody's making their entire life. And you have this kind of scale, and it's really fucking hard to even envision. And if you put this on a logarithmic scale, it will get less ridiculous. But it's still like almost like a tiny fucking sliver here is what most people have. And then you look at that and you're like, oh, I mean, it's just, it's almost an inconceivable amount of wealth for an individual to have. Now, of course, if you gave everybody $10 trillion, then that becomes insignificant. But the differences are now, it's like, okay, that has been kind of washed away. And you have a little fluctuation here, but now everybody's got like this much plus or minus. And of course, yeah, the thing is, of course, wealth will concentrate. People will become depleted of it. Some people will have more, but you're kind of leveling the playing field. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the only way to do it, but that's one thing you could do. One thing, and it's also, and again, like the MMT thing, yeah, you'll create necessarily and naturally there you would create inflation. Although if you just made a one-time influx, things would renormalize. Now, on the other hand, if you did that and then didn't do it worldwide, then now you have one country with people who, and again, that will get corrected to some extent, but there's still going to be, a shit ton of money in that one country, and then the rest of the world, in many regions like abject poverty, and in many others, not a lot. So you have to figure out what to do there. I mean, if you were going to be in like fantasy world, have the UN or somebody do this and issue their own currency, which overrides all other currency and then just washes everything away. Now, the problem is there are many, many more people who are making very, very little and who have very, very little. But the people who have so much have the resources to really push back on shit like that. It's one of the reasons why it's so bad and so anti-democratic to have that level of disparity and concentration of wealth. Even if you don't have something like Citizens United, which says that speech and money are interchangeable, which is an insane concept. And I mean, but even without that, stupidly wealthy people are going to have much more influence. It's just the way things are. Once you add in Citizens United, I mean, think about this. This person who's a sliver in this tiny little sliver screaming at the top of their lungs would probably be inaudible. Whereas this person with all this shit could just barely whisper, and it's deafening. Like anyone around will hear them. And if they want to throw that in and do nefarious things, then they can easily do it. So anyway, rambling on. Back to MLK Day. MLK Day. MLK is an interesting figure historically. Like, nobody is perfect. Obviously, you can find flaws in anyone. I'm not going to even go into those, but obviously they exist. But interesting guy, and especially given that there are so many people, including people like Manchin and Sinema and John McCain's daughter, almost called him McClain. Oh, don't know why. But Meghan McCain, all sitting there going, like, here's this shiny MLK quote that I'm going to put on Twitter. They're going to talk about him. It's kind of funny when you think about it, because the things that he stood for, I mean, even the things that are popularized in terms of like civil rights, this kind of stuff, these are people who in fact, Kevin fucking McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, this guy put a fucking MLK quote up. All of these are people who are standing in the way of voting rights. And not even like real voting rights legislation, but the stuff that's there now, which is way watered down and way inadequate. They're pushing back against that. They're going to probably keep us from having any kind of legislation pass at a national level this cycle, which means we're probably in pretty shitty situation going forward, to such an extent that, like, I just don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that things are unrecoverable without a major reset. I mean, like a massive kind of reset. But you look at it and you're like, things are fucked up to such an extent that it really is kind of hard to imagine when you have so many places where things like election certification are controlled by completely partisan people who have very strong vested interest in certain outcomes of the election, and they have the ability not to certify elections because they don't feel like it. They can just come up with whatever results they want, or they can put whatever electors they want into the EC, or they can just do all kinds of really fucked up shit. Once you have that kind of stuff, and I mean, even absent that stuff, we're pretty fucking far from being what you could consider a reasonably free and fair democracy, even a democratic republic. But you know, it's like you look at things. If you look at polling, things that people like 60%, 80%, 90% of people want can never happen. Like, it's not even conceivable that they would happen under our current system, under the current circumstance, with the current elected officials. That's fucked up. That's pretty wrong. Now, obviously, you definitely probably do want some kind of a buffer between popular opinion and legislation. But what we have now is a complete disconnect. There is no coupling, like no coupling at all, between what people want and the things that are happening. That's a pretty fucked up situation. Like, most people don't think that people in Congress should be able to buy and sell stocks. The people who do, I think, haven't really thought about insider trading and the ramifications of having people. I mean, if you think about it, I've gotten in arguments with people about this, but I mean, people will argue about fucking anything, but you know, it's dumb. I'm sorry, but you'll get in an argument with somebody and they'll be like, well, why can't random congressperson, why can't Greg Stanton buy and sell stocks? Greg Stanton, he's not even like a big guy. He's not like Nancy Pelosi. He's not a 100 millionaire or multi-hundred millionaire. He's just a random guy. Well, the thing is, especially if you're on a committee that is pertinent to anything in the market, which is many committees, many people, even if you're a junior congressperson, you could be in a situation where A, you can influence the outcome, and B, you could say shit that would move markets. You could say, or just drop hints to people like, hey, we're gonna do this. Now, it doesn't have to be true. If it happens to be true, then you can still move the market. If it's not true, you can still move the market. You can do things like know in advance that, we're going to pass legislation that's going to make this thing obsolete. And once we do that, the value of this stock is going to crash. And I happen to own a lot of it, so I'm gonna cash out like before everybody. This kind of shit is just like the most ridiculous, over the top kind of shit, and it obvious as fuck too. And yet people consider it like, yeah, of course. Why would you want to stop that, Scott? It's fucking insane, is what it is. Yeah, and then you think about, I mean, also MLK, I guess it's an interesting thing. When he was murdered, he was actually doing a sort of labor union thing. He was out there for workers, right? And you have all of these people, so it's not just civil, I mean, well, they're interconnected, but he wasn't just doing like pure civil rights. He was a very big advocate of like organized labor and things like this. And you have, again, like these fucking McCain people. Again, I hate that they own so much mind space, like Sinema and Manchin. These should be people who you never fucking think about. Kevin McCarthy, I shouldn't know that fucker's name. Trump. The fact that the amount of cycles that I've spent worrying about any of these people is so far beyond what any of them deserve. I mean, these are just shitty people. They are reprehensible, garbage people who, frankly, have no business. I mean, honestly, they should just be like some troll on an internet forum at most. Like, okay, they're there, they have their own little world where they can shit in the pool, but they're very contained and nobody gives a fuck what they're doing. I mean, if you imagine Sinema in her proper station in life, she would have no power, she would have no money, or at least no, like no more money than the average person. Pick your average, I don't care, but by whatever the most restrictive average that you want to use, she would be there. And no influence. Like, she should be somebody that you don't even pay. Like, maybe if she wants to fucking straighten out and not be a complete troll and asshole, maybe then we can think about having, somebody talk to her. But other than that, like, she should just be ignored as a nuisance and an asshole. And yet, she's somebody who gets so much time, so much attention, so much energy devoted at her, and it's fucked up. And you think about it also. I mean, the people who, just a more general kind of electoral problem, zooming a little bit out from her, although it influences that, because you always have people trying to play to the margins. You have the solid Democrats who they're going to vote for Democrat. You have the solid Republicans, they're going to vote for Republican. And the margin in between, the air quotes swing voters, are a very small percentage, ridiculously small, and they, under the current circumstances, now maybe 30, 40 years ago, this wasn't the case, but right now, in the world that we're in, these are people who must be just summarily uninformed or disinformed, and they have like a complete lack of judgment. There's no way you can, and I don't even care what your fucking principles are, even if you're like a radical anarcho-capitalist, that's at least some kind of ideology. If you're there, then the Republicans are the party for you, and absent that kind of thing, like, people are sitting there like, oh, I don't know, am I going to vote for Trump or Biden? Like, if that person should not be trusted to judge anything. That person should not have any influence in the world. If you really, and I mean, don't get me wrong, Biden is a complete piece of shit. But Trump is worse. And the person who's sitting there kind of hemming and hawing between the two, I can understand at least, like, you're like, fuck both of them and you're going to vote for a third party. Although with our current system, you're basically, it's not as though that comes with no cost. There's a cost associated with voting for a third party, and that is that your vote is no longer going to be for this one or against that one. And again, the whole structure of all of this is fucked up. But rolling back, you think about it, the people who are the least informed, the people who have the worst judgment, are making a lot of decisions. And part of it is they're making the decisions because they're the ones who can push the election one way or another. And part of it also is not even that they're making the decisions, but you have this other sort of political class, the people who thought Sinema is the only, and still think Sinema is the only one who could possibly win Arizona, which is obviously not true because Mark Kelly did it, but also, not that Mark Kelly's a fucking prize. I mean, honestly, the thing about Kelly is, this is a guy who's, I mean, if his wife wasn't who his wife was, or is, and he didn't have kind of the inside track, he didn't have, the being an astronaut and being somewhat known and being, like, able to go to the donors and get some money and getting everything kind of teed up before he even announced his candidacy, he was basically the nominee, which I find beyond shitty. This is not how a fucking democracy works. It's not how it should work. Sinema also, like, her primary, such as it wasn't a primary at all. Deidre worked her ass off. Now, also, like, nobody's perfect. You could certainly find things to criticize her for, but I would say that she fucking earned, at the very least, a debate with Sinema, which was totally off the table. I mean, to me, if you're someone like Sinema, or you're someone like Pelosi, or, anyone of that sort of tier, not being willing to have a debate with somebody should be disqualifying. If you are in a primary with somebody and both people are on the ballot, and that I'm not saying like you should have to debate fucking everybody, but if you're both on the ballot, you should have to at least have one debate. And that debate should also be not the modern sort of debate, but actually moderated by people who are not complete pieces of shit. Not some infotainment kind of people, but people who actually are knowledgeable and they're able to maintain things. They're able to compel people to actually answer questions rather than just the complete debate bullshit that people do. You should have to do that at least once. Not doing that, being unwilling to go up and even talk with somebody and answer questions, that should just be an automatic forfeit if it was a reasonable system. And yet, Sinema was like, oh, well, and this was the thing that I heard. So, not to relitigate this election, but I talked to so many people who were talking about, well, we've got Sinema. I liked it. This is the thing that I would always hear. I like Deidre better. They would always start with that. They like Deidre better. I don't know that that's true, but that's what they would say. So let's take them at their word there. But the state, you can't possibly have someone like Deidre win because the state they're not bigoted, by the way. They're not Islamophobic. They're not, whatever else you want to say. The state, these other people, are so bigoted. It's an interesting thing and fucked up as well that you can sit there and essentially not even give people the opportunity to do the right thing. Yeah. And honestly, like, maybe it's true. I don't think so. I think if you were somebody in the general election and you saw somebody like Deidre and you saw McSally, I would say most people, if you actually listen to them talk, would probably go for Deidre. When I say most, obviously, they're the hardcore Republicans who at the moment are fucking insane. And, if you want to know how insane they are, look at the Republican Party in any state. Look at their Twitter feed. It's like bonkers. It's detached from reality. The Democrats are pretty bad too, but they're at least like grounded in reality to some extent. The Republicans are just like fucking wackos. And I don't think that's helping anyone. I don't think either one of these groups is benefiting from being in that situation. There's an interesting thing also. I mean, like, I don't know. Anyway, Deidre got 20%. I think it's either 20 or 25. I want to say 20. And Sinema got 80. And it was all these people who were sitting there going like, I like Deidre better, but people are going to vote for Sinema. So it's not even that margin. It's not even that sort of swing voter who's actually making the decisions. It's the people who are in this kind of political class who really, I mean, these are the perfect example of who these people are is that these are people who absolutely knew, without any shadow of doubt, that Hillary was going to win and that Trump never could. Knew that. Like, not a question. And to me, I mean, if I had that bad of judgment, if my judgment was so bad that like I was certain of something that proved catastrophically wrong, it would shake my confidence. And then I think this should fucking, if you thought you knew how to drive and the minute you got in the car, you just flipped it over a bunch of times and, you're landing on your roof and spinning around, you should probably hesitate before getting in a car again. And you should also, I mean, anyone who saw that shit should be going like, maybe you shouldn't be driving. Maybe you need to take some lessons. Maybe, let's get in the simulator, take some lessons, we'll stand back. Or maybe even like, you can just be in a place where there's public transit and then you're not going to do that shit. Because if you did that, you shouldn't be driving. You just shouldn't. And you see that, and instead they're like, oh, okay, I did that, but, it's just those damn Bernie bros or those damn whatever the fuck they want to say. Yeah, they come up with a million excuses. It's never them. There's no agency, there's no responsibility. It's just some external factor that they had no influence over. Just like what we did was perfect, but, you know, and I got to tell you that but just tells you what you did was not perfect. If you built a train that would work perfectly, but if it deviated by a tenth of a millimeter, plus or minus to the left or to the right, on a track with a few millimeters of wiggle, then the train would explode. That's not a safe train. That's not that, you know, if the train explodes, like you could say, well, yeah, the wind was blowing it. But the fact that you designed it in that way, that you operated something that required that level of precision, and in this case, I mean, it's not to say that like the Hillary thing was a precise kind of thing. But you know, there's this whole concept of like, oh, they're doing 10th dimensional chess, you know, planning on things and like working. I mean, the strategy level of this shit is like tic-tac-toe. You know, in fact, it's almost not even tic-tac-toe. Yeah, it's like low-level, stupid strategy with people who think that they're playing not even Go, but like hyperdimensional Go with wormholes and some kind of non-trivial topology. And, you know, they think they're playing that, like a game that is completely impossible to solve or even model or conceive of. And in reality, you know, they're kind of playing tick, like literally put an X or put an O down, and you have no, I'm not saying they have no agency in it, but they have very little control. They have very little understanding of the game. They have very little ability to influence the outcome. And I guess really a more fair thing would be, it's like you're flipping a coin one time. And you shouldn't be flipping a fucking coin. When it comes to an election, if your odds are basically a coin toss, you're doing it wrong. Now, obviously, you know, if everybody's playing at the top of their game and everybody's doing everything perfectly, then maybe it is a coin toss. But if Hillary was, I'm sorry to keep going back to 2016, but if Hillary was the person, the tactician, the strategist that people kind of make her out to be, then it wouldn't have mattered that Comey wrote a stupid letter. It wouldn't have mattered all of these, you know, you just go down the list, the whole email thing. It wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered that, like, when I talked to people, they were just kind of, you know, reliable Democratic voters were sitting there saying, you know, like, oh, I just don't like Hillary, or they don't trust her, or worse. If you were a brilliant tactician and brilliant strategist, the first thing you have to do is recognize what the situation is. What is the battleground that you're on? They didn't do that. They completely missed like some states that they're like, oh, we don't even have to try in Michigan. That's a slam dunk. Let's not even bother there. Yeah, I mean, when somebody's got that kind of judgment, this should be a massive red flag. When you have people who, I mean, some of these, and I fucking loathe, just detest Nate Silver. I don't want to say anything good about him, but his model for the 2016 election was pretty good. It was pretty decent. A lot of people didn't understand the statistics, but I think his numbers were pretty right. And his numbers literally said, okay, well, if we ran the election 1,000 times, at some points during the cycle, it would have been a coin toss. It was like a 50-50 shot, which is crazy. And then at other points, it would have been, you know, I think the best that it ever got was winning Russian roulette for Hillary to win. And a 1 chance in 6, I don't think that's a good chance. Like, those are not odds that I want, especially when it's like, okay, 1 chance in 6, Donald Trump is the president. Those are bad fucking odds. Now, you would see people also at the same time who were saying, there was a New York Times polling thing that was like, oh, it's 99% certain, oh, it's 95% certain. And you'd look at this shit and you'd be like, I don't think you know how to do your modeling. Yeah, and I'm not saying Nate Silver is a genius at this. And literally all he did, it's pretty fucking stupid. He looked for skews and de-skewed stuff, and then just ran a bunch of simulations. Like, oh, there's a 60. This poll says that the probability here is 60%, and then that tends to be 5% biased, so we're going to correct for that. And then we're just going to run a bunch of simulations based on those probabilities, and then you get an ensemble of outcomes, and then you collect statistics on that, and then you do your modeling. That is the modeling, I guess. That's a thing you can do. It's not very complicated. It's not very sophisticated, but it's a thing to do. A lot of these other people, like, I don't even think they were de-skewing polls. They were just like compositing stuff. And they were also doing things like not factoring in odds at all, and essentially saying like, oh, well, 90% of the people say that they're going to vote for her, so that's a 90% chance. I mean, it's like, from a statistics point of view, dumb. And yet those are people who went on to have jobs and careers after that. They're the people who got in the car and as they were pulling it out, flipped it over and were spinning and doing like crazy shit. And yet that no consequences at all. So anyway, man, I could go on about this. Obviously it's like an hour now, so I am going to, not going to do the walk, which was earlier today, but I am going to take my own walk, which I like to do several times a day. So, given that it's like 9 o'clock, I'm going to bid you adieu. 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 I can hear that it's wrong. In my mind, I can say it right, and I can't get the word out right. Man, when I was living in France, I lived in a place called Creil, and getting the train ticket from Paris to there, I didn't live there that long. I lived there like a month when I was there. Before I was, before that, I was living in not near, like a decent walk from the last station on the 11, Las Lilas. And then moved there, and then the last bit of time that I was there, I was in Montrouge, and like a 5-minute walk from the metro station, which was awesome. And there I didn't have to deal with this, but while I was in Creil, something like that, I would go regularly, like once or twice a month, once or twice a week, not a month. Once or twice a week, I would go to Paris and come back. And every time I did it, I'd go to the fucking train station and I'd try to get the ticket back. And I would, billet pour Creil, and the woman behind, or whoever was behind the counter, I'm picturing one particular encounter, but that happened a bunch of times. Person behind the counter is like, Creil? And I just have no idea what I was saying. And then we'd go back and forth for 5 minutes, and then she'd go, Creil. And I'd be like, that's what I just fucking said. Yeah, I mean, obviously in French, but and also like I wasn't, my French was not strong enough to come back. And I'm not even sure now if I'm saying it anywhere near right or not. But it was such a weird thing. I mean, it was also like I had to spend a day, a fucking solid day, just going because I would have that sound, and I would not be able to make it. I could make it with like an isolated word, but then I'd put it in a sentence or something, and it would just not come out right. And if you don't have that then it's a different word to people. It's like actually in say in Mandarin, if you have ma, it's like mother or horse, or is it the question particle, or which one is it? And I could say it, like after a while I could practice it, and then I could say it in isolation, and then I would put it together in a sentence, and it would all fall apart. And you're sitting there trying to say I would like tea, which I'm gonna embarrass myself by trying to say it. Which I'm going to preface this by saying it's going to be horrible, horrible. But, and in fact, it's been so long since I've even ordered it. I would say something like Wajiao, Zhicha Ba, something like that. I don't know exactly what it was, but I would say it, and then in context, in a restaurant where tea was on the menu, people would not know what the fuck I was saying. And you'd go back and forth, and then you'd be like, and you're like, that's what I fucking said. But it's amazing how, I don't know how I got on this tangent, but it's an annoying thing to get off on. But it's amazing how, like, if you do not have that, I guess really in some way, this goes back to this thing that I'm always talking about, that in your mind you have this high dimensional space, and you're taking these concepts in this high dimensional space and then flattening them out to a very low dimensional set of sounds, and then those are transmitted to somebody else, and then those get projected back into the high dimensional space of another person. And if you're coming from somebody who, like, you're both from the same culture, you have the same words, you have the same, you're getting at least kind of in the ballpark. But when it's something where the projections that I'm coming out with these things and flattening it out in a certain way based on my cultural experiences and the language that I was raised with, and the what I've practiced and all that kind of stuff, and then you have somebody else who has a completely different set of ideas and sounds that they hear, and especially if it's something like that where it's just not in English. There's no there's no, or maybe it exists, but it's like a weird random thing, but it's not something that you're like trained to say, and then they're trained to hear it though. So if you go and you mean it's not the same sound. It's like a versus a the two liquids. They're a totally different sound to some people, and to other people, and are the same sound. They're both just a liquid, voiced or not voiced, but it's like a choice based on the context and So you get there, and it's I don't know. It's an interesting thing about human communication. Anyway, blathering on. I do want to go for my walk. I feel like I'm umming a lot here, but that'll do for now. And with that, thank you very much as always, and 再见.